Welcome to We Are Grant County, where we share conversations about the people, stories, and experiences that shape our community. Today we're talking about something many families face but don't always talk about: caring for adults with developmental disabilities, especially as parents age and caregiving responsibilities begin to shift. Joining us today is Samantha Harrison, a disability support strategist with Momentum Family Strategies, whose work focuses on helping families navigate what she calls life after mom and dad. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us today, and please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. My name is Samantha Harrison. I'm the founder of Momentum Family Strategies. We support adults with developmental disabilities and their siblings with navigating life after mom and dad. So what happens for adults with autism, Down syndrome, or other disabilities when their primary caregivers can no longer provide the support that they need? Because a lot of times folks with those disabilities need lifelong care, and we're really blessed that people with disabilities are now living longer than ever, and we have to start thinking about what are we doing when mom and dad can't continue to provide that care.
What got you into this? Like, how did you end up in the role that you're in?
Yeah, I would have never imagined being here. But when I was in high school, I supported a lot of friends that had disabilities. And several of them said, hey, when you graduate, would you like to work for our child? And I thought, that's weird. They're my friend. Like, why are they going to pay me for that? But I didn't understand that our Medicaid system has a mechanism in place to be able to pay people to provide one-on-one supports to adults with disabilities in the community, as opposed to living in an institutional setting. And we call those Medicaid waiver programs. And so I started with my first client, it was probably 2013 or so. That went really well. I met someone else who was in her 30s. She lived in her own apartment. She had cerebral palsy. She needed essentially 24/7 support. And we really had a cool opportunity to help pull folks together to help her live as normal of a life as possible. She was an artist. She worked for the University of Kentucky. And she had just incredible people supporting her that was funded by a Medicaid waiver program. And so I started there, and the question really started to come up: how do we recruit people to be in this person's life who are going to stay and provide quality support services? And then also, what's going to happen when mom and dad are gone and they can't continue to facilitate this? Because they were very integral in supporting her and living in her own home. They had a lot of roles to make sure that that could happen, even though they didn't live there. And she had a sibling that lived across the country. And, my friend said to me, like, my sister's not going to live here. She has a degree in a field that requires her to be near the coast, and we're going to have to figure this out together, kind of thing. And I had just started thinking in that direction when my friend got sick and passed. And so after that, it really just was this reflection moment of, hey, it's not just us. It's plenty of people who are living to be older and older. And how do we support our aging population who are primary caregivers to their children?
I think that there is a need for what you're doing. Absolutely. Because I can imagine not having that resource. If your parents are the one who help facilitate your everyday life, you lose that resource. It's possible you lose your voice if you're unable to communicate your needs.
For sure. So what we see often is, well, when I'm gone, parents thinking along the lines of, when I'm gone, they'll have to move to a group home. And we have a lot of wonderful residential programs in Kentucky that provide great quality of life for people. But think about it. If you've lived in your family home for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, that's all that you've ever known. And first of all, you've lost your parents and the people that have surrounded you, but now you've lost your home, and you're forced to live with roommates that you didn't get to choose. And that's a really hard transition for people. And so we work a lot with families on how can we use the same funding that would pay for a group home to be able to help them sustain their own home, and be able to get supports there.
So you've kind of touched on it, but what exactly is Life After Mom and Dad? Is that an actual program, or is it just kind of like a catchphrase type thing?
Yeah, so life after mom and dad is just describing the phase of life that's happening when your parents are gone. And I have kind of developed, I guess, that catchphrase, right, to be able to help call attention to the issue. Because nobody likes to talk about when people pass away, right? Like, that's a very taboo topic. And so instead of saying something along the lines of when your parents pass away, let's really think about what your life could look like after your mom and dad are gone. And so we offer a variety of different programs, but life after mom and dad is just kind of our overarching conversation starter, if you will, you know.
So when would be a good time for someone to maybe reach out to you, or even know, I guess, even know that the service is available, and when and how to reach out?
Yeah, so one of the things that we are running into right now is that we have a tremendous amount of caregivers ages 70 and older, and more than we realize, in their 80s and 90s, providing care to their children that are in their 60s. And those folks, we are seeing time and time again, are families that made a decision 60 years ago. No, thank you. We don't need government help because that means putting my child in an institution. And so they have remained outside of our social service system, have not accessed service for the last 60 years. And the notion of going to government services means that their child might be institutionalized to them. That's not where we are anymore with services, but that education and things has not made its way. And so people, unfortunately, we've had, many families that are having caregivers pass away in the home and really tragic situations. And so what we are trying to do right now is to get information out to friends and family. We would love it if those folks that are in their 80s and 90s are listening to the podcast airways and all those things. Is that happening? Probably not. Yeah. We would love that. But what we know, first and foremost, is to be able to reach those folks, we have to get out into the wider community and be visible and offer these opportunities for people to understand that someone can sit down with you and talk about what's going to happen next. And not only with the caregiver, but also with the sibling, because a lot of times the parent might pass away and the sibling inherits all of these things. And whether or not mom and dad felt comfortable talking about it depends on how much information the sibling got. And so it could just be like starting over, kind of like adopting an adult in a way, right? Like they have their own life and their own needs, and mom and dad knew all the ins and outs of it, and the sibling has to get caught up really quickly. So we connect with families a lot of times during that caregiver transition. Either something has happened to mom and dad, there's been an illness or injury, and the sibling or next of kin. Sibling could be, not everybody has a sibling. So really, like, the root of where we work is with successor caregivers. So who is stepping up into that role? But successor caregiver is a mouthful. So we tend to just use the phrase sibling. But when we're talking about that, it could be aunt, uncle, cousin, who is that next person that's going to be stepping up to support that individual with disabilities.
So it sounds like you kind of touched on some of the common challenges that families would have. Like, they might know that this day is coming, but they're not prepared for it, or information wasn't shared with them, or they weren't brought in at a certain time. So the because some people can transition into this role and just kind of be thrown into it kind of unexpectedly, because, everybody's always been paying attention to it. So how would we, or I guess what would be the best way to maybe try to reach those people? Like, that these resources are even, that they're even possible. I know we kind of mentioned that a minute ago, but are there any strategies to try to reach, because, we're talking about older adults, but now that those older adults are past, 80s and 90s, now we're talking to people that are in their 30s to 50s. So, there's different platforms to reach different age groups.
For sure. Yeah. So we have been doing a lot of outreach in coffee shops, which seems to be a place where folks in their 50s and 60s, a lot of the siblings that we work with end up being around age 65 when they're taking this over. But that certainly, can range, depend on the situation. We have a lot of conversations in coffee shops, and we also have a lot of information around the state in coffee shops. And that has been really interesting to hear caregivers see that and call us and say, oh my goodness, we we were meeting at this coffee shop to talk about my brother, and I just happened to see this, and one of the questions we always ask is, why didn't we know these services were available before? And while, the Medicaid waiver programs that we work in are available statewide, it is a public service type situation, right? For whatever reason, our social service system has not done the best job at outreach to that older community. And so we're just trying to get caught up there, right? Mm-hmm. So in terms of reaching the younger crowd and the successor caregivers, conversations like these, conversations with your neighbor, hearing this podcast, even if this situation doesn't apply to you, and thinking about your neighbor who has Susie who lives at home with them, and just starting that conversation of, hey, I know you've got a lot on your plate. I heard about these services and I would love to get you connected. Those are really the kind of like grassroots conversations we're hoping to foster so that we can raise awareness about this life after mom and dad period and help people get access to support services.
I think that's a great idea, because it's good that you're focusing on the later in life, but I think most of the time when we're thinking about disabilities and things like that, we're looking at early on in the process. But as we know, life, it changes. So even having those resources as younger, could be very beneficial as well. But I don't think we necessarily think in the older ages. Most of the time, the disabilities and things, we know a lot more about the youth. So
right. And that's so interesting, because when we start talking about what we do at Momentum, and everybody wants us to refer us to the Resource Fair for Children, and while we're happy to be there and talk with those families, and there's certainly a lot of work that can be done preemptively to plan for these things, where Momentum is focusing is in this crisis situation that we have happening, because the unfortunate reality is we have caregivers that are dying with adults with developmental disabilities living in the home with no way to call for help. And so that's where we really decided, like, we have a crisis on our hands as this aging population is aging older. We really have to get out in direct support of what's happening at this moment. And then in the future, I'm sure we're going to be having a whole lot more conversations with children and all of those things. But the number of folks, like, we just got finished working with the family. The caregiver was 89. And the person with disabilities was in their 90s and had never had social service support before. And, how were they continuing to manage this on their own? Like, it was getting to be a really risky situation. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to help in the moment. Let's get some folks out here to support you so that we don't end up with a broken hip or something of that nature.
So not slipping through the cracks, right? Like,
right.
So you do a lot of hands-on, smaller, so you're promoting, but these services are family per family per family, correct?
Right. So, yeah. So we do a lot of promotion of how are we navigating life after mom and dad, and trying to, reach out to families and get the word out to communities who can share with their neighbors. Let's get you some support for these things. So one of the big misnomers in social services right now in Kentucky is that Medicaid waivers are available and they can provide care to adults with disabilities, but because our waiting lists are 20 plus years long for residential services, families think they just can't access it at all. And so we're trying to change that narrative and help people understand that, yes, you should be on a waiting list, even though it's 20 years long. Let's go ahead and get you on it now. And there are certain criteria if you have an emergency, like the death or decline of a primary caregiver or other loss of housing or services, that you can get emergency services in those very serious situations.
Do you currently have to be on Medicaid to access the services, or become someone on Medicaid to access the services, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we can support families that are or are not currently on Medicaid at Momentum directly. In terms of accessing Medicaid waiver services, you would need to be eligible for Medicaid, which looks a little bit different than just the insurance piece. And so there's some considerations in terms of financial resources and those types of things. And we work a lot with special needs trust attorneys and estate planning attorneys to talk about how to get those resources settled if there's a home, to make sure it's properly inherited into a trust and the things that make sense for that family, so that that individual remains eligible for services. But it's not a requirement to have a conversation with us to have Medicaid already. That is something we can help people apply for if that's something that they need as we get down the road.
Okay. So what would be the strengths of the communities that can help fill in some of the gaps?
For sure. Yeah. So, when we are navigating care in rural communities, we know, all of the challenges that come with just general life in rural communities and access to healthcare and all of those things, right? But it also gets harder to find caregivers and support staff to come to your home, right? The further out that you live, the more challenging that can be. Oftentimes there's not transportation reimbursement and all of those barriers. And so one of the things that I love helping families in rural areas think about is, if you are receiving a Medicaid waiver, you can hire your own staff. So you could choose to hire a sibling to provide your care. You could hire the neighbor. And it's a really wonderful way to help the person stay in their home and continue to be supported by their caregivers, by their community members, right? And be able to get the care that they need, as opposed to having to call an agency in from Florence or from wherever. So that's a really helpful resource that's out there.
And it also makes it a little more feasible for those helpers, right? So they're not taking on financial burden of extra costs, but having that willing helper, but being able to provide that extra help, it can be really beneficial.
For sure. And then, of course, we have folks that are still on waiting lists, and navigating that in rural areas can be very challenging too. I always talk with folks about the who, what, when, where, and why of future planning and adulthood, and thinking about, let's not start with who is supporting us, right? But why are we doing this? What is the vision for the person's life? And then work on who would be a good fit to fit specific roles. Maybe we have somebody that loves to go to church on Sunday. Let's see if we can find a church member that's willing to stop by and pick them up on the way there, and someone else to take them home. There are ways that we can look at specific roles in a person's life that doesn't necessarily have to be a paid role, right? But how do we fit people who are already in that area? Maybe somebody has a job at Walmart, and we know that the person next door works at the bank. Could they ride together? Those kinds of things, to work on some innovation supports.
So we've talked about, we've kind of narrowed it down to like siblings, but we know that it could be like family members or friends of family or anybody that's taking care of these individuals. What would be some early signs, like for somebody to watch out for, of maybe burnout or just kind of like overload, or they need a break?
For sure, right? And when I talk to caregivers, they're always like, I need a break, but how's that going to happen?
Yeah.
So not only what are the signs to look out for, but how do we start putting in place the supports to be able to facilitate that break as well? I think the most important part of that is trying to see where you can find smaller points of relief. So like we were talking about with who can provide a ride to the bank, or who can provide those types of things. Can you look at the people in your community that might not be the most obvious choice? Like, it's easy for folks to say, well, we don't know anybody, right? But actually, who do you run into at church? Or who do you see, if you're going to Beans every, Friday morning on your way to work or whatever it is, like, do you know people that you could invite to be part of that person's life?
And that makes that, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that makes, like, I wouldn't have even thought like even that small. You would think like bigger, like who can I, what company can I bring in, or who do I need to bring in, or whatever. But even just thinking that small as just your neighbor.
For sure. Just your neighbor, just who did I meet, going back and forth to the bank. Or, one of the things that I encourage families to do is to create a business card. And it can have the person that you're supporting's face on it. My business card has my face on it, and people talk about that all the time. And I struggled with that originally, but it's been actually a cool tool. And so, if you make a business card, or just even, cut up a piece of paper, right? And have that person's first name and their image on there, and a contact number or an email address. And then if you're out and you've met someone that you think would be a really great fit to add to your care team, whether formally or informally, you can share that information with them and say, hey, we'd really love to talk with you more about this. Let's set up a time to go to coffee or something like that.
That doesn't sound like something that I would even think of, but I can see exactly how that would be a very good tool. Especially having their face on it, so that they could, see the person and know that it's a real person. And you can talk about somebody, but when you get to see pictures or video and meet the person, it's just different.
For me, it's connecting a name with a face, because I'll be really good with faces, but name's not as good. So for an ADHD person like me, that is an excellent idea.
Right, for sure. Yeah, that may have come out of my own neurodivergent brain. And it seems like, for a caregiver who's totally overwhelmed and going, I don't know how we're going to get through this next week, meeting somebody at a coffee shop and hitting the business card probably sounds ludicrous. Okay. But we have to start having a conversation about where are the small points where we could relieve things. Mm-hmm. Would it make a difference for you if maybe you stay home from church for a couple of Sundays and see if someone else would like to take your loved one? And that's a hard choice to make, but maybe if you had some quiet time at home alone and you're able to do your own devotion during that time, as opposed to being a direct caregiver, that might make a whole lot of difference. And that's a small change, even if you just do that for a couple of weeks, or you have someone come to the home while you go to church, or that kind of a thing. Where are those small pockets that we can start to make some relief so that we can build up that momentum to keep going with building a care team?
So aside from meeting people out and about and things like that, what would be, if a family or a person is just overwhelmed, what would be their first steps to trying to get some help?
For sure. And so, if we are dealing with a situation where a caregiver is just like, hey, we've got too much going on, I'm trying to work, I am trying to provide all the care needs for this person, this is not going to go on much further. We're glad to sit down and have a conversation with people on resource navigation, with anybody in our community that needs that support. I know that you guys will have contact information and things later, but we're always happy to do a free session with families just to get resource navigation going. Let's talk about the 2 or 3 top issues that you've got going on. And if it's something that Momentum can support, fantastic. But most importantly, we want to be of service to the community, that if you're really struggling and you need some next steps, let's get you connected to those folks that can help you with service relief, and start that action planning of what can we do today to relieve some of that pressure. And
so it basically goes, I guess, hand in hand with the preparation of everything. So Momentum, knowing that this day's coming, Momentum can help you get prepared so that we don't get to that eventual overwhelm part.
For sure, right. And we're always happy to talk with siblings and successor caregivers and aging parents that are planning ahead as well. One of the things that we're just seeing the most commonly right now, because this area has been so unaddressed for so long, is that we're just running rampant with emergency situations, right? But yes, we absolutely do meet with folks and help them get connected to what is the right next step to be planning, or, how can we start thinking in advance?
So that's basically just putting all the systems at work. So Momentum working. And so are you more of a facilitator between the individuals or the families and the caregivers, or exactly what part does Momentum play?
Yeah, so we sit down with families and hear what's going on, what supports and services have they tried, and figure out where the gaps are, right? And so in some of those cases, that might mean that we need to go and apply for a Medicaid waiver if they're eligible for that to be able to get paid services going. If the family financially is not eligible for waiver services, if the person with a disability has inherited a home or something to that effect without a special needs trust in place, we can figure out ways to use the resources they have to recruit and hire caregivers. But largely what we end up supporting families with is helping them access Medicaid waiver services if they're eligible, and then navigating the recruiting and hiring of those caregivers, and really just serving as a strategist and a coach to the successor caregiver, right? How do we help you walk through each step of the process? In some cases, that's getting connected with Northkey or Northern Kentucky Area Development to talk about some of those things as well. There is a crisis line for Northkey that we can put in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
if you are having a crisis and need immediate support, that is available 24/7.
So we've talked about like siblings or, family members, friends of the family. They obviously are aware of the situation and how this might come up. But what would be maybe the awareness that we could share with the community, the larger part? How do we kind of make them aware of what some needs might be? Just make sure that they understand that this situation even exists. Like they might not even think about it.
Right, for sure. And we all know each other one way or another, right? And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't know anybody in that situation, it may be that you have a friend or a family member that is struggling with these things that don't talk about it as much, right? Unfortunately, with this older crowd, disability is a real taboo topic. And so it just was something that we don't talk about a whole lot. Maybe you see this person here, there, and yonder, but you don't really, get to spend a lot of time with them. And so when you're having conversations with people that are really struggling as a caregiver and very frustrated, that's typically when these things start to come out, right? You're sitting down with, the same guy that you have coffee with every Tuesday morning, and you're hearing how much his wife is struggling because they are trying to care for her sister and what have you. So being able to know about the services that are available through our Medicaid waiver programs that can provide support services is really important. And of course, directing them someplace like here at Momentum, or also to Northkey, to the crisis team, can really help get some services in place to surround that family.
It sounds easy enough.
That really, like, in terms of, reaching out, getting support, that is really it. The thing is, how do we get everybody on board with this issue? Yep. And so, it is a lot of community awareness. I was listening to your episode earlier today about the fair, and I thought that would be a really great opportunity to get in front, to start having some conversations about these things. And so as we move forward into 2026, we are obviously providing direct service to family, but one of our main missions is, community service and community awareness to help people understand, that it isn't just a group home as your only option. And furthermore, if you're out there and have heard, yes, we know about Medicaid waivers, we know there's funding for that, but the waiting list is 20 years long, so we're not going to bother. That is not the place to be. We need to go ahead and get you enrolled. And if you have a life-changing situation, we need to think about, could you be eligible to move ahead on that list, specifically for our Supports for Community Living waiver program. A lot of folks just think, why bother? And we want to change that narrative.
I think really just spreading that information, like you said. So it's kind of making sure you're available in the emergency, but also making those connections with the services, making sure they know you're available, right? Being able to communicate that and connect the community. It's very important. And I'm glad that you're providing that service and that you came to talk to us so that we can help provide that information. So thank you.
So what would be maybe some final messages that you've that could be hopeful for the families in Grant County?
For sure. It has been really interesting to me to see that when I moved to the area from Louisville several years ago, that the amount of information and support that we have in the rural counties surrounding Louisville Metro is very different than the amount of information and support that we have in the rural counties that surround greater Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been eye-opening on a number of levels. And so what I want Grant County families to know is that if you're supporting an adult with developmental disabilities, there are services and supports out there, whether those are for formal programs or developing natural supports in your community and having somebody help coach you through what that looks like. And we want to be able to support you with those things. I'm sorry that we haven't done as good of a job with educating this area as we could on those things. Secondly, you don't have to wait to talk about life after mom and dad until it's time for an emergency. Mm-hmm. So absolutely be having conversations with successor caregivers and siblings on what are this person's daily routines like, writing those things down. I met with a caregiver who was in her 80s the other day, and she pulled out this portable file cabinet of everything that had happened in this person's life for almost 90 years. And I was like, this is the kind of record keeping we need, because she can hand that over to the next person and they will have everything they need. So even if it's just open the drawer and throw it in, keeping those records, would be really helpful for your next person. And try the best that you can not to be afraid to talk about the future. It's hard, and it doesn't come easy to anybody, but the more that we talk about it, the less stigmatized and the less scary that it has to be,
Absolutely. We could probably use some filing advice from an older generation. I think that might be something we maybe bring into the digital age, and maybe we can help them figure out that communication without the giant file cabinet.
Yeah. So the other day I recommended to a family, you guys you're hiring people and you have a team, create an email address for your loved one. It doesn't have to be their name. It could be in initials or, whatever you want it to be, but create a dedicated email address. And if you're not sending the email to the case manager from that address, CC that address so that, and leave the contact info, the login information for that email for your successor caregiver. They can go back and see all of the things that you've ever sent by email just because you took the time to CC that email address,
That's one way to do it. Yeah. So where can our listeners learn more about Momentum Family Strategies?
Yes, MomentumFamilyStrategies.com is where we live. Happy to chat with anybody there. Plenty of information about support services in life after mom and dad. There's educational articles and things on there. There'll also be a link to several videos and podcasts and things that we've talked more about these topics if you're curious to learn those things. And there's a button on the top and throughout. If you have a question, we would love to talk with you. We sit down and meet totally free consultation with every family just to help get things flowing and, resources go in your direction.
And just by anybody listening to this podcast, they can, at least I know I can, sense your I don't know if love for the topic or love for the subject is what it is, but your dedication to it, your understanding of it, and you're willing to really listen to their situations or scenarios and help them out the best you can.
So thank you so much. Dedication.
Yeah. There you go.
It's
passion.
Wonderful.
That's it.
Yeah. Surely that. It really does. There is nothing that I enjoy more than sitting with the family and hashing through these things. And I wish it didn't have to be in the toughest moments. And so while we are glad to sit there and support people and get things moving as quickly as we can, I'm looking forward to a future where we can have things rolling a bit sooner.
And I'll talk to you about it in a little bit as well, but we've got the We Are Grant County app, and I'm going to add like a health services area to it. So we'll kind of get Momentum's information on there too. So, but thank you very much, Samantha, for being part of the We Are Grant County podcast and recording with us.
Yes, glad to be here.
We all learned together the recording process here. got the video going.
Samantha, thank you for sharing your insight and for the work you're doing to support families navigating these challenges. If today's conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to learn more about Samantha and the work being done at Momentum Family Strategies. And as always, thank you for listening to We Are Grant County, where we celebrate the people, stories, and connections that make our community strong.
ToadTalkMedia.com